Amelia gripped the seat handles so tightly her knuckles went white as the small aircraft bucked and shuddered through the violent Alaskan sky. Below, the rugged landscape rushed toward them with terrifying speed, each dip of the plane sending her stomach lurching upward. The engine whined and sputtered, a sickening sound that promised nothing good. Mayday! 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 The pilot shouted into the radio, his voice cracking with desperation. What's wrong? Amelia yelled over the deafening roar of the failing engines. The pilot glanced at her, his pupils so dilated they looked entirely black. I'm sorry, ma'am. Looks like we're going down. The expression on his face told her everything. He had lost all hope. If an experienced Alaskan bush pilot was this terrified, their situation was beyond dire. Amelia closed her eyes, wishing she had just one more conversation with Dale. One more chance to tell him all the truths she had kept locked in her heart for too long. The plane slammed into the treeline with a bone-jarring impact that snapped off the left wing and sent the craft tumbling down the mountainside. Amelia felt every jolt as her body shook like a rag doll. She prayed for a quick end. But on the next impact, her head smashed into the bulkhead, and everything went black. She never felt her seat rip free from the wreckage, flinging her through the trees and over rocky outcrops before she slid to a rest at the base of the mountain. When she regained consciousness, Amelia found herself upside down, still strapped into what remained of her seat, surrounded by a white wonderland of snow. Her head throbbed, her body ached, and her left shoulder screamed with every movement. With cold, trembling fingers, she fumbled at the latch until it finally released, sending her sliding further down the steep incline. She managed to clamber to her feet, but a wave of nausea overwhelmed her, and she vomited into the snow. Cradling her injured arm, she blinked away the encroaching darkness at the edges of her vision, perceiving nothing but whiteness in every direction. She decided to continue down the mountain, away from the wreckage. After what felt like hours of stumbling through the deep snow, vomiting, and dry heaving more than once, she spotted a small cabin nestled in the middle of nowhere. With the last of her strength, she forced the door open and collapsed inside, barely remembering to shut it before burying herself in a pile of dingy fabric and surrendering to unconsciousness. Caleb Delac loved the isolation of the Brooks Mountains, the majestic snow-capped peaks, the pristine white beauty, and the blessed silence. But with that love came an understanding that when things went wrong, they went catastrophically wrong. Living 11.5 months alone in the wilderness meant that only his wits and preparation stood between him and death. He had begun his day as usual, checking his traps and chopping wood, when the blade on his axe cracked. Cursing under his breath, he decided to hike 4 miles to his satellite camp, where he had stored a replacement. He grabbed his rifle, revolver, and snowshoes, loaded his sled with supplies, and set out into the half-light of early Alaskan fall. Halfway along the trail, a resounding boom echoed across the mountain range, shaking snow from the pine branches. He couldn't pinpoint the direction, the hills distorted the sound, but he hoped no one was injured. In this terrain, they wouldn't last long without help. At the satellite camp, Caleb noticed signs of disturbance, trampled snow and dark stains that could be blood. He drew his knife and revolver, circling the perimeter cautiously before pushing open the cabin door. In the dim light streaming through the entrance, he saw a huddled mound under moldy tarps. Pulling back the fabric, he discovered a battered, bruised, and bloody woman, barely alive. Her shoulder was dislocated, her forehead gashed, and her clothes were shredded and charred. She had somehow survived a plane crash and stumbled into his camp. Caleb carried her 5 miles back to his main cabin, wrapping her in bear fur to keep her warm. For 2 days, Amelia drifted in and out of consciousness. He reset her shoulder with a sickening pop, stitched the gash on her forehead, and washed the dirt and pine needles from her wounds. He spooned water onto her parched lips and adjusted her blankets hourly to prevent bedsores. He had been a state trooper years ago, and his emergency training kicked in with detached efficiency. On the 3rd day, Amelia finally awakened. "Dale," she rasped, reaching into empty air. "Hush," Caleb said, taking her rough, calloused hand. "You're safe." "My name is Caleb." "Where's Dale?" she begged, tears forming in her eyes. "There wasn't anyone with you when I found you," he replied gently. Over the following days, Amelia grew stronger. Caleb learned she was an environmental surveyor from Houston, on her way to Barrow for an impact study when her plane went down. But the bigger problem was survival. The supply plane wouldn't return until July, and their winter stores wouldn't support 2 people for 9 months. One morning, Caleb decided to try fishing. He taught Amelia how to use the unhack, an ice testing tool with a sharpened tip and a hooked end. But when he ventured onto the frozen lake, the ice cracked beneath him, plunging him into the freezing water. His clothes dragged him down, and panic seized his heart as he sank. Amelia heard the crack and saw him disappear. Without hesitation, she crawled onto the ice, reaching for him. He surfaced gasping, his head banging against the ice sheet. She grabbed his hand, pulling with all her strength, her injured shoulder burning with agony. "The unhack," he shouted. She retrieved the tool, positioned it across the hole, and together they managed to drag him back to shore. Inside the cabin, she stripped off his wet clothes and wrapped him in blankets, then climbed in beside him to share her body heat. His freezing body pressed against hers, and as warmth returned, his instincts took over. He kissed her, his hands exploring, and she felt his arousal against her leg. But when he rolled on top of her, she cried out in pain, and he stopped abruptly. "I'm sorry," he breathed, rolling away. "I didn't mean to do that." She slipped back under the blankets with a quilt between them, knowing he needed her warmth to survive. The next morning, Caleb announced his plan. He would hike to the crash site to scavenge emergency supplies. He taught Amelia to shoot a revolver, stocked the cabin with firewood and water, and left at dawn, promising to return within a day. While he was gone, Amelia cleaned the cabin from top to bottom. She scrubbed rust off his skinning knives, organized his supplies, and made the small space feel almost homely. In the process, she discovered an old steamer trunk hidden under furs. Inside were photographs, a smiling Caleb holding an infant, his arms wrapped around a beautiful woman. She found his Alaskan state trooper badge, letters of commendation, and a divorce decree. His ex-wife, Elizabeth, had sole custody of their daughter, Lucy. Caleb had lost his family and retreated to the wilderness to escape his pain. Caleb returned as night fell, dragging bags of scavenged supplies. He found Amelia surrounded by his personal effects and erupted in anger. "What gives you the right to go through my things?" he demanded. Amelia apologized profusely, helping him gather the scattered papers. When everything was restored, Caleb leaned against the trunk, his shoulders shaking with sobs. She knelt beside him, clasping his hands. "I'm so sorry, Caleb. I didn't mean to pry." He sighed, the anger fading. "I know. It's just, this is all I have left." He told her about the crash. The pilot, Billy, had overloaded the plane with liquor he planned to sell to oil rig workers, causing the engine failure. Billy didn't survive. Caleb had buried him and collected his wedding ring and wallet to return to his widow. Amelia held the items reverently. I'll make sure his family gets these when I go home. Caleb pulled out the survival supplies, misters, medical kits, fishing tackle, sleeping bags, blankets, and tools. The extra resources would help them survive the winter. That night, they sat together at the clean table, eating a simple meal. Amelia looked at Caleb, this rough, solitary man who had saved her life, cared for her wounds, and shared his meager provisions. She thought about Dale, the relationship she had left behind, and how it had already been fading. Here, in this frozen wilderness, she felt more alive than she had in years. We'll make it, Caleb said softly, reading her thoughts. Together. She nodded, allowing herself a small smile. For the first time since the crash, she believed him.